Great, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk. Yeah, my background is was with Oracle, and then I went from blue chip business systems into online gaming with Betfair, and then I've ended up in retailing with Attract. And it's a really interesting opportunity because actually it's quite a revolution at the moment, I think, in terms of what's happening in search. So you might know us more for the Fred Hopper product, actually our Fred Hopper discovery platform. So as Attract, we've got about 240 and growing of the world's leading brands and retailers that are using our products. And our vision really is to be an integral part of the world's best shopping experiences. And that's really about bringing a continuous flow of algorithms and experience innovation. So why experience? I mean, that'll come back to that in a second. I think it's a very important part. What we heard Rennie say earlier on is don't forget the perspective of the seller. What we heard other speakers this morning say is don't forget about the other people in the other teams across the company and what they've got to bring to the picture. And I'm also going to say, don't forget the buyer. Actually, don't forget what their experience is, because I think, as Andreas said in the previous talk, you don't really have anything to work with unless they actually have that first click. They've got to engage. And so there's an element of us making the most of how people are converting once they're on site, but there's also about creating experiences that are compelling enough to actually get them to visit and be on site in the first place. So this is really all about uniting business and data science teams, and I say data science in the broadest sense, all the people that have got something to bring to the picture, about enabling their creative potential and creating commercial growth through that. So looking at some of the AI trends, you could say search has become more than a text box. It's a bit of an obvious statement, but in fact, the search experience is really changing. And consumer electronics is responsible for this in terms of what you have on your smartphones and what you're able to do with devices out and about. So basically, consumers have a lot of choice. They have a lot of information. Retailers have no real control over that. But what retailers do have control over is the experience they actually provide. And so you can see things like self-learning search or personalization algorithms, chatbots and digital assistants. They're all things that are actually bringing a richer experience because they are responding to the user's behavior as they're actually visiting, shopping, and exploring what's going on. And if you're having a good conversation with somebody, you love them to talk back, don't you? You want them to actually be interacting with you. You do not want this flat experience. So that's part of what we need to do, is how do you make it more interactive? So if you're looking at AI techniques such as natural language understanding or some of the neural network work or collaborative filtering, they're all really looking for patterns of behavior that you can reflect back to your users. That's what we're really doing. And by reflecting back that behavior, you're hoping to create a relationship, which means that they engage more with you. So I know there's a lot of very technically oriented people in the audience, but I think this very people-oriented part is actually a really important dimension as we go forward. So we can bring together historical trends, preference, context, and actually really voice and image as well. Voice and image are actually part of the conversation now. I learn by watching shoppers. In fact, I watch my daughters. They skim read with their thumb. They're browsing through, searching for what they want. And when they see it, they know it. They just need the inspiration in order to know which way that gesture is going to flick. Is it going to go to the like? Is it going to go to the dislike? Is it going to be, maybe I'll come back to that? So it's all about including all of these new technology opportunities as part of the conversation. Let's just take a look at this. Some of you may have heard recently that Attract has just acquired a company called Early Birds in Paris. It's really exciting for us because what we have in the Fred Hopper Discovery platform is a very extensible framework, right? And what Early Birds brings to the party for us is actually the ability to create algorithms. Not just a few algorithms, but a platform for creating algorithms. It could be open source algorithms. It could actually be algorithms that we've created or our specialists have created that are relevant to a particular vertical in the industry. Or it could be algorithms that our clients have developed. And we've already seen that in working with a number of clients, is that they have data science teams themselves, and they want to be able to include those signals as part of the rankings that we put into search. So this example is about Cdiscount, which has got about 50 million products in the catalog. And the interesting thing is it turned out to be a real collaboration between Early Birds and the client, where the client's data science team had really good understanding of the 1 million really well-known products in the catalog. And so their algorithm for ranking actually produced the best relevant scores and the best results. Meanwhile, the Early Birds algorithm, which was built on a much broader set of inputs and catalogs, actually performed better for the long tail. And we saw Andreas talking about that earlier on, is you need almost different strategies for different parts of the spectrum. And then what they discovered is that by working together, by collaborating, the combination of the client's algorithm and the Early Birds algorithm produced the best result for the intersection of that 2 million overlapping products, where they were partially known but not fully known or understood. So this is just an example of how bringing together different algorithms and having them collaborate and having the organizations collaborate around how to best collect those inputs and put them into search made a significant difference for this particular client. So how do we do this? Because I think a lot of this is as much a change of attitude as it is about technology. We've got some really great technology and we've got some really smart people. The first thing that we really need to do is actually unlock the potential from our silos. I actually had a lot of interesting conversations yesterday evening with a number of the guys. People still have teams where they're locked up. You know, the business drives each of the teams by objectives, right? You guys, your job is to maximize the revenue. You guys, minimize the waste. And what happens is that you've got these different internal teams are actually conflicting with each other. They're working against each other in order to optimize their own team goals. So how are you going to change that? You need to break it down. You need actually to allow them to learn from the data that you're collecting. So each team is collecting its own data, but how much data are you actually sharing with other teams? Is this something that you're actually actively doing across your business? Are you able to see the data that is coming from all the other teams and functions so that you can see that if I've optimized this piece of the puzzle, is that actually conflicting with somebody else's goals? So you need to be able to unlock data, be able to share data. You need to be able to develop the capability to respond as a business. Now, that means breaking down the actual working practices, putting together people to actually work on problems together, right? As opposed to working within their individual groups and teams. I'll go further than that. It's not just the teams within your company. You need to reach out to include all the teams that you might be working with. That could be your partners or it could be clients, depending on what type of business you are. But if you're not collecting the inputs from all of those teams, you're not actually able to focus on what the business goal is. So what I've found effective in the past is to create virtual teams. Don't worry about the physical organization of the team. Everybody still needs a manager. Just leave them where they are. But free them up to work together. Sit them together. Give them a common purpose. Actually have them work day to day together to actually solve business problems. So how can you actually approach that? First of all, free them to set their own goals. Set the parameters for them, but actually enable them to identify the opportunities and put a value against those opportunities. Actually, in development, we're used to using agile as a technique. The whole business needs to go agile, right? If you become more driven by the opportunities that are available to you, you can capitalize on small opportunities piece by piece. There's rarely a big bang that actually makes a huge difference, or they're so few and far between that we spend all our time trying to optimize. So why not behave that way? Why not actually focus on small incremental value where the teams themselves actually find it? This actually involves making sure that you've got really great visualization capability across the teams. Make sure that you can actually graph, chart, access, and see. We've seen today, tables and numbers are hard to actually relate to. There's valuable information in there. How do we get those trends out? Make sure that's available to all. I've said that. Train everybody on the basics of data science. Why not tool people up and skill them? I think that's one of the earlier presenters also was commenting on the importance of actually enabling your team with new skills. Create multidisciplined individuals in your organization. Bring them together and enable them to share disciplines so that they can move and cross boundaries more easily. And then as you actually get into the workings of this, is develop a regular cadence, develop a best practice for doing it. We've heard people talking about testing and learning. I think what you should also be thinking about is innovating and learning, right? It's not just trying to test whether the widgets you've already got are the right ones. It's about testing whether the new ideas that your teams are coming up with are actually generating the value that you need. So I think that's part of the attitude and the culture of it is let people have a go, let people make mistakes, but just have a very simple framework in place where you can actually see how that's working. If you are using algorithms, which you should be because in fact at the end of the day you need to scale, then make sure they're transparent, make sure they can explain themselves, because if you can't understand what the algorithm's doing, then nobody can learn from it. And that means that you've actually stagnated your organization. You can't move anywhere, you can't grow. And then look to having the technology and the orchestration capability available to actually enable you to combine the best results, right? In fact, actually, you could substitute people and algorithms, right? It doesn't matter where the intelligence or the ideas are coming from. You need to be able to blend together strategies, and that's what we saw in the Cdiscount example earlier on. So I know we all like to think of AI as being a kind of emulation of human intelligence, so I'm just going to flip that around for a little bit of fun, and I'm going to invite Andreas to join me, because I want to interview him as a new potential candidate algorithm on my team. So Andreas, welcome. Thanks for coming. Now, I understand that you're interested in actually joining my on-site search team in order to optimize our e-commerce experience. So can you tell me a little bit about your previous experience in similar roles?
Thanks for inviting me, Peter. Yeah, I may not look like the average algorithm today, but I hope I can still be a bit of help. Yeah, so my background is actually in web and document search. Probably like most of my algorithm colleagues, I come from that area. So I've definitely been working on very similar problems and definitely similar scale. And I know there's a few differences here and there to retail. So just like the type of data that you have, things a little bit more structured, I understand. And the behavior is a bit different, but I'm sure I'll be able to make that work.
That's great. So you're pretty confident, right? So how do you plan to apply your knowledge to this role? What are you going to have to adapt?
Well, I suppose the first thing is always to actually understand the differences in industry, actually. So for me, I suppose the most important thing is to understand what data is actually there. So basically, what product information have you got? What's the quality there? What user interactions have you got tracked? So basically, what analytics data? Then also just to basically see how language is used, because we are talking of search after all. So just to see what are the little peculiarities in the use of words, how they're used in different contexts, for example.
Well, that's interesting. So what you're telling me is that, in fact, you as an algorithm have to have quite a deep understanding of what people mean. Can you give me an example, say, for the fashion industry that is specific to that?
Yes, I definitely can. So there's some really good examples where the language differs between, let's say, what I used to do in the past and just general purpose web search. Think of the term turtleneck and the term roll neck. If you just think of an average web search, you'll probably see that those two terms are used quite interchangeably. But then if we actually look at some really fashion-forward retailers, I think ASOS, for example, their audience, they probably know the difference, because there actually is a difference, which I had to learn about, and took me a while. Or there's also the fact that sometimes terms are used really just by single brands. So I think of someone like Adidas who got their prime knit fabric, which is just a woven fabric that maybe Nike might call differently. But all these specifics you need to understand, and you need to understand how much your shoppers actually understand.
That's cool. That's interesting. So, now, how do you find out about this terminology then? How do you go about discovering that across the organisation?
Well, I suppose there's two general approaches actually. So there's the one I probably know best, which is basically just sit there, watch, see what users and shoppers do, and then over time try to work things out. It can take a bit of time, to be honest. So sometimes what I try to do is actually I try to combine it with talking to people. Because in the organization there's plenty of specialists that basically live and breathe fashion. So they know all the little details, and they can help me with that.
So, for example, any particular expertise across the organisation you'd want to look into?
So actually there's expertise in really all the different departments that we usually, not interact with. So if we think of, for example, the buying and the merchandising teams, they buy products, and they buy them for a reason. So they can tell what might be upcoming fashion trends. Or the merchandising, the trading team, they know what products or how they can sell products, and basically what policies are there in the background. Maybe do things need to be sold out before the end of the season? And of course there's a marketing team. They can tell us who our shoppers are, and maybe not so much who the shoppers are today, but who should our shoppers be in the future. So we're not only optimizing for the things, the behavior we see today, but actually the behavior that we want to have.
Looking forward. So does that not lead to situations, though, where you've got conflicting inputs and requirements?
Unfortunately, it always does. And sometimes people are not even aware of that when they set goals and requirements. So what's been happening a lot in the past is my managers always told me to optimize for single KPI. Usually it's conversion rate. And I do that. I think I do a really good job in that. And then after a few months, they come back, and there's all kind of people raising concerns about why didn't I sell the product that was on brand, or why did I promote this discounted product. So there's often these additional trade-offs that need to be modeled, and that's why whenever I start a new engagement nowadays, I always insist on getting very clear goals. So I need to understand what requirements there are, what goals the different stakeholders have, and then we need to turn that into basically a single goal, so that in the end of the day, we know if we've succeeded or not.
So how do you collaborate across teams?
I suppose the important thing is to talk and listen. So first I try to actually understand what these teams want to achieve. So that's basically the goals. Try to understand how I can help them. So I think of the merchandising team, for example, probably might be able to help them make their day a little bit more efficient, and maybe take away some of the boring tasks. And also try to understand how they can help me. So for example, if I'm not entirely confident about something, I might just know who the person is that I can talk to get a second opinion. And I think that's really important.
So sharing your actual workings and how you find the results and what your confidence level is really important to you. So that sounds an awful lot of detail. How can people deal with all that complexity?
Yeah, that's something I always wonder. So, I usually just share, or I used to share a lot of data, and I don't know, for some reason humans, they don't really like when I just share a million rows. I mean, it's so easy to look at them, but Yeah, so I had to learn to actually explain things in a slightly different way. So I suppose nowadays what I need to do is, what I've learned to do is I try to aggregate information and I try to visualize it. That really seems to help the teams.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, look, Andres, thanks. I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're going to be a really interesting addition to the team. My point here is that there's a lot of things about algorithms that's really similar to any person on the team. And if you want to use algorithms, it's great. But actually, let's really focus on enabling our teams too to get the best results. And if we look at this, just to summarize, you kind of need to be able to give people clear goals. You need to actually have them be able to work independently with all the data and the knowledge that they need. You need them to be clear on how they're making progress and to be explaining what they're doing, how they're achieving towards their goals, and then you need to become able to come up for air so that you can look at the strategies that you've set and review them as a team. Now, back to my point about agile, this is actually where the business needs to become agile as well in the way that it's working. So it really expands out, right? If you've got data, and from that you've actually gained insights, finding the links and the patterns and the possibilities, it's actually the people that are actually going to find those possibilities and recognize those opportunities. And they'll do it together when they put their ideas in together as working as part of a close collaboration. And so that's where, you know, having a culture where you've got dedicated teams that are actually solving a business problem that you're trying to solve is going to actually bring together ideas from each of the teams, break down those silos and maximize your opportunity in finding that, that insight that you're looking for. And then don't be afraid to iterate. Do it with some control, because in fact, if you have too many experiments going on at once, how are you going to know what makes the difference? But it's about taking a risk, trying it, doing it rapidly, and then repeating and learning and collecting more data. So it's a real cycle. A lot of people tell me this is quite obvious. When I actually see this in practice in companies, it's usually not implemented in a way that is making it a true living process. It's like everybody has a status meeting once a week or once a month to see how the latest project is going. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living and breathing it as a way of doing it. And when you do that, it makes a big difference. So let me give you an example. This is for a company, Forever New, who focus on women's fashions. And they took a new technology in terms of image recognition, so that was their algorithm, and they put together a cross-functional team to learn how to use it and exploit it. So it was brand new for them, wasn't quite sure what it was going to do, and they basically were able to figure out how to apply it to achieve quite an interesting uplift in commercial value and in terms of shopper experience. So I'm not going to talk about the results, I'm going to talk about how they did it. And in this particular case, they started with a simple experiment. They just had a simple recommender for visually similar items on the product details pages. And they had people from the transaction trading team looking at what the conversion, what the actual purchase rates were, what the return rates were, all kinds of stuff like that. That's interesting, right? It's starting to think about what your returns rate is when you're actually thinking about your search recommendation, because actually it matters. You may be making revenue, but it's not really very useful revenue if you're spending a lot in refunds. They brought together these different groups to look at how much of the catalog was exposed, you know, what the conversion rate was, what the time on the site was like. They looked at all of these things combined together, and iteratively, through small experiments, they were able to drive quite a remarkable result. And from that, they then went on to new ideas. So from that one simple beginning, which was just a simple recommender, it's like, well, hang on, what happens if I roll over the image and I now see a little strip of visually similar items? Why is this working? And the answer was that their clients, their customers, actually wanted to buy things that they were confident about. And once they'd found one thing that they were confident about, They were happy to see their brains could recognize things that were, similar items. They didn't need the algorithms to be too smart about, the descriptions, if you like. They just needed to know where to go next. And that's actually part of the user journey. And so that's where I think user journeys is a really important part about e-commerce search. It's as much about the journey as about the individual items that you're looking at. And so that takes you on to the next idea they wanted to explore was shop the look. So instead of presenting one item, why not present a collection of items? That's a whole outfit for which you can actually show visually similar pieces for each of the outfit. So that's a very interesting one where now, in one place, without having to click and go very far by just hovering or looking at recommendations, they could see a much broader selection of the catalogue. So that's an interesting part of the experience, right? Is it actually made it more convenient. They didn't have to go, the shopper didn't have to go very far. It also started to recognize the importance of the different signals that you need at different stages of the journey. Early on in the journey, the shoppers need inspiration. They need to have the context. They need to explore and develop their ideas before they get to that point where they say, right, now I want to buy. Now I want to actually figure out what the right price is for me. So this was just an example of how that came together for a Forever New. And actually such a success, they've actually continued working in this way. So if we just pull this all back together, I won't read these, because really what I'm saying, it's about a practical behavior change. The next, if you like, era of search is all about the experience. It's actually all about the buyer and how they engage with you, because the more they engage, the more clicks you've got to analyze and optimize. Yes, we absolutely need AI, and we absolutely need all of that to automate and give us the scale, but we also need to create that engagement in order to get people to come through the front door in the first place. So breaking down the silos enables a cross-functional team to discover new insights because they can compare how that works for the business. It's about the trends in the shopper behavior. It increases both the commercial value and actually creates a more engaging result at the same time. So it's tempting to see this as just a recommendation technology, and I'm aware that some people may react that way and think, it's not search. But I think shopper behavior has changed because of the technology that they've got available. And it's really important that we actually recognize that. So with the simple use of gestures, the emphasis has shifted away from text to being far more voice and visually driven. And so that's the kind of experience that I think we should be actually investing our effort in, to think about how those richer conversations actually drive a more engaging experience and a more rewarding result for the shoppers, and through that will drive the commerce. So that's why we should be talking about collaborating to evolve and adapt. It's a kind of meta search, if you like. So thanks for listening. I hope that's actually been useful to you. I've applied these techniques in a number of places, and it's actually been surprisingly productive, but very hard to sell to the business initially until they see some results. So it's always a good idea to start small, build a few successes, and actually then see how that works.
So hello, I'm Carsten. You said that the most important thing in an algorithm is that it can be explained. You say pick transparent algorithms. Would you say that transparent algorithms are more important than algorithms that yield better results? So if you have an explainable AI, is that more important than AI achieving better KPIs?
So for me, I think it is important because if you are developing an organization to actually learn about the business and grow the business, then that organization needs to understand how the technology is working for it and what that technology is doing. Otherwise, what you're doing is disabling the organization, you're preventing its own growth. Now, if you can achieve great KPI results as well, that's fantastic.
Just my question is more like, would you prefer a decision tree over a random forest, because the decision tree is more transparent than the random forest is?
Well, I think what you do is you actually evaluate it in the context of the problem that you're solving with it. So I would actually ask the team. So if you put together a team of people that are actually working to solve a business problem, give them a choice. Actually allow them to have a scorecard and choose what are the techniques that are going to work for them.
Okay.
Thank you. Great talk. Do you have an example like where you experienced like a lot of resistance within your company and you just applied some tricks or something to make all this change happen? So some use case?
Yeah, we did. Actually, it was in a previous life when I was in the gaming world, and we had 3 divisions. One was actually focused on exchange, if you like, matchmaking of sports betting. One was engaged on the sports book, and the other was focused on gaming, right, and pure gaming. And they each had their own product management organizations, their own development teams. Everything was completely separate. And what we couldn't understand is why the business was not thriving in the way that we thought. And so we'd built the technology group, and they was really able to build and implement many different projects, but we're still not succeeding. So we could create innovation, but the innovation wasn't sticking. And what we discovered is actually we then put together the marketing teams and the product teams. And we looked at the campaigns and the way that they were actually advertising and trying to inspire the customers to come to the site and engage in the different activities. And surprise, surprise, they were all actually marketing to the same sets of people for different events at the same time. And so actually what we needed to do was to bring together the information about the events, the information about the people that were being targeted by the campaign, and their propensity or their interest in the different types of activity. And by doing that, we used to have a basically a daily scrum cycle for the marketing campaigns, where they would actually compare who are we targeting, what are the events, and then they would actually prioritize based on what they thought the best revenue yield out of those campaigns would be. And we saw a dramatic improvement in the overall revenue that came out of that. So it's a simple example, but it was very effective. It led us then to actually change the way that we manage the site as well. So I created a new kind of development structure where the front end was actually controlled by the analytics team, and they were looking at the value of user journeys, right? So instead of what am I going to click on next, we looked at what did I do overall in my session. And that told us a lot more about intent. And so we changed the way that we guided user journeys as opposed to worrying about the next thing that we recommended. So just some examples of what we did differently.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much.